All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast with me, Evan McDermott. For today's show, I was joined by Aurorah Yarberry. She is an astrologist and host of the Blood Moon Milk podcast. This is a really fantastic conversation. We dove deep into astrology, how to bring it to a practical and pragmatic level and get the most of it out of our lives. She said a great quote in this that actually came from JP Morgan. It said, millionaires don't use astrology, but billionaires do. So there's a deep, deep science in astrology and really how we can use it as a life map and roadmap for ourselves in a world that is tending to be devoid and what we view as chaotic in the sense of finding a sense of organization and stability. We aren't all, it's devoid of really having a practical how-to guide. So I think astrology can bring something along those lines. I hope you guys enjoy this one as much as I did. If you're a fan of the show, be sure to subscribe, whatever platform you are on, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it may be. Press that subscribe button, leave us a 5-star review. My new book, The Final Judgment, the new poetry collection, it is here, it is out, it is available. You can purchase it on Amazon, leave us a 5-star review on there. That's a great way to support the show if you enjoy my content. Seriously, it's only $14.99 on Amazon, and you'll be supporting the show and getting some great poems, all about balancing personal reckoning, spiritual awakening, remembering who we are. That's really what the show is all about. So if you enjoy the show, you'll probably enjoy the poetry book. Be sure to head on over to Amazon. It is Amazon Prime, so you get it pretty quickly. And I appreciate you guys supporting the show in that way and getting the book. Please leave us a review for the book if you guys do enjoy it. I'd love to hear your feedback. And head over to mcdermott.substack.com and you can subscribe for free over there. Be notified of every podcast, every poem, everything that I am releasing. It's all on the Substack. And special thank you to our official sponsor, Tranquil Desires, Chamberlain, South Dakota, the home for all of your spiritual and wellness needs. So thank you to Patty for supporting the show in the way that she does. Without further ado, let's jump into the podcast with Aurorah Yarberry. Enjoy. All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast. For today's show, I am joined by Aurorah Yarberry, astrologer, host of the Blood Moon Milk podcast, also an artist, filmmaker, truly dabbing in many different modalities, which are all interconnected in a lot of ways. But Aurorah, thanks for joining the show. I'm really excited to be able to chat with you.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. And, I'd love to start just by hearing a little bit about your own background. How is it that you came to, because you're really operating within a niche space in a way, and you're really carving your own path. So what was it that sort of brought you into the space that you're in now?
Oh, I think a lot of different things that were really specific to my personal journey that made me a kind of human cocktail for who I am.
Mhm.
Um, I had interesting parents. I've had a lot of ups and downs and triumph and tragedy in my life, which has kind of given me a very unique perspective, which is pretty open-minded and I would say empathetic to various people's points of views and experiences. Um, but my main focus these days is working with astrology and specifically using astrology for mindfulness, for meditation, and for helping to manifest an abundant, peaceful lifestyle. And a lot of times that has to do with tapping into your own creativity, your own self-empowerment, and dealing with some of your own personal, psychological proclivities that might have been formative to who you are as a person. And so that's what I do with clients. And I write a daily email newsletter where people can get my personal take on the astrology of the day. And I do the podcast. So that's kind of what I do on a daily basis these days. But how I got there um, is really an amalgam of a personal journey through my own triumphs and tribulations and finding tools that worked for me. And working with them and developing a system that not only works for me, but I think is beneficial for others.
I love that. And I definitely relate because it does feel like you use the word triumphs and tragedies. It does feel like those high points and those low points are actually what kind of cultivates the deeper awareness and stepping into our own path a little bit. And, my own spiritual journey, I would say, started with meditation, but it developed into tarot and it's developed into, expressing myself through poetry and really paying attention to my own intuitive process, right? But it does feel like it is sort of just a coming back to ourselves in a
Yeah,
lot of way.
absolutely.
And
Absolutely. I think especially here in the West, we are so sort of developed by society outside of ourselves, outside the home, to be productive and commercially viable on some level,
Mhm.
whether that means going to school or going to learn a trade or, um, like just make sure that you're busy and you're making money and you're doing and you're buying and you're consuming. And all of those things are certainly important. But I think what gets left out oftentimes is that coming back home to yourself and connecting with the thing that lights you up inside and burns that fire. And that's going to be unique and different for every individual. Um, but I think that the ability to do that is what really gives us the ability to fulfill our lives and find happiness that's unique to us.
Absolutely. I definitely resonate with that. I come from an education background, that was my original field of study. And the
Mm.
one thing that even now going to work into schools, I don't always see that emphasis for coming back to ourselves and what is it that actually lights our inner fire and what is it that, how do we create a life of true meaning and purpose and develop that, social emotional intelligence,
Oh
right?
yeah.
They're not points of emphasis in the
Yeah.
way that we're brought up, which is unfortunate. But I think, as more people like yourself and more people like me and the people you work with as we develop that, that can become sort of a point of emphasis, at least within our own family units or in, our communities. And I feel like that is starting to pick up a little bit more. I don't know if I'm just surrounding myself with the right people and maybe I got a little biased, but it does seem like that's becoming more of a point of emphasis in the individual.
Absolutely. And I would say that the astrology suggests that we're on the cusp of that becoming more and more emphasized on a daily basis as well. I don't know if you realize this or not, but Pluto, the slowest moving outer planet in our solar system, and certainly the furthest out planet that I look at on a regular basis in my astrology practice, is moving from the sign of Capricorn. He's
Mhm.
currently at 29 degrees Capricorn and he's moving into Aquarius. Well, he'll spend the next 20 years, which that's a big energy shift from what you can refer to or think of as mass capitalism into something that's a little bit more grassroots up oriented in terms of energy generation. Where it's like you can think of it as a switching of polarities from a top-down structure from a to a bottom-up structure that we'll see over the next 2 decades unfold. And so I think you're right. We are on the precipice of something that is more sort of mindful in its practice and commerce, not only the way we do business, but the way we educate and the way we care for our communities.
Definitely. Well, and I think that's a prime example of how astrology can be used to sort of map and forecast our
Yeah.
reality. Because I mean, that's a prime example. I feel that shift happening, and the astrology backs it up in
Yeah.
terms of, well, this is the energy behind it. I mean, in what ways do you think people, whether it's, I guess on an individual level too, people can start to look at, let's say, their own chart or look at where their placements are. How can people begin to start actually? Because one of the big things that I'm looking for in my own ways of navigating the world is like we don't have a life map, right? We don't generally have a forecast of, well, this is how we can you, you know there is we aren't given a guide to how to live life, but it feels like something like astrology, it actually kind of does give you that little forecast where there isn't any other fields that necessarily provide that, right? So, I mean, what are some ways people can start to look at that and start charting their their path in a way?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So I practice Western Hellenistic astrology, and I work with people's natal charts,
Mm,
um, along with transits. And transits are the movement of the planets on a day-to-day basis. So you can think of the natal chart as something that is static, sort of like a thumbprint or a blueprint for a person's personality, but it's affected by the weather around it, right? So that's really that weather is the transits of the planets. So that's one analogy to kind of how to think of the system of astrology that I work with. And other systems of astrology are similar in that function, but there are a lot of different systems out there. There's Vedic astrology, there's Draconic astrology, and there's even like Jewish astrology that's different. So there's different modalities, but I think the thing that they each have in common is they have some sort of defining system within which each has their own rules in which they work. And so there's different ways to use each kind. But what I like to do is work with clients and their natal charts and the transits of the day and find practical ways to help translate those energies for people to digest easily so that it's useful information. And they can take it as far as they want with self-education. And if you learn your natal chart just as you would other personal vital information like your phone number, your address, that kind of thing, you can begin to forecast and calculate based on the planetary movements for yourself, and then in tune, read those energies so you can have your own internal connection with that energy. And when you do that, you start to become more attuned to the energy of the collective and what's happening on a day-to-day basis, and you become less overwhelmed a little
mm.
bit at a time.
Right, definitely. Do you think the main thing that maybe, because I know there's a lot of people who just have their own preconceived notions or misconceptions or just sort of barriers that prevent I guess, us from looking even into astrology, right? From beginning to even to dive into it. Does that just stem from sort of more of a materialistic mindset, the need to sort of take a science-based approach? But I mean, I view astrology very much, it's very spiritual, but it's also it feels like a science in the way that we're able to chart it and map it out, right? So, I mean, what do you think some of those like primary barriers are and why we're so hesitant to sort of embrace this on a more collective scale?
I think that's a great question, and I think there's a multitude of reasons why. I think some are personal to the individual, but others we can take a step back and look at the history of astrology and the way it's been practiced and used, and kind of begin to understand why there was a shift, because people have been using astrology since the Phoenicians and the Babylonians. Berosus was a Babylonian priest in approximately 280 BC, who brought the study of astrology to Greece. And it's been practiced in Greece and in the West ever since.
Hmm.
So we really have about 2,300 years or more years worth of data with the planets and observations of the way planets move and what happens when particular planets are in different places. And so we have this data to look at that shows us probability. It is not necessarily fortune telling, it's just looking at what has happened in the past and saying, well, if it's happened in the past hundreds of times at this point, it's likely or probable to happen again in the future when these planets move into similar positions. And that's really what everything astrological is based off of, is observation over periods of time. Now, I think there was a major shift from giving astrology credibility during the Enlightenment period and the Industrial Revolution because of the advancements in science and medicine and also in the academic fields. And they just wanted to separate themselves from astrological practices because they wanted to sort of forge their own way. And rightfully, those practices are valid and need to find their own footing. But I think maybe there was some I suspect there was some political motives behind throwing the historical practice of astrology under the bus, if you will, to gain their own credibility for their respective practices. And I'm all for a scientific mind, but science, by definition, does have to um, appreciate the analysis of data sets.
Hmm.
And that's all astrology really is.
And that's a good way to look at it. And, for me, it feels like if I'm trying to trace back some of the roots of, I would say, some of the issues that we face in modern society, right? It feels like a lot of it comes from, the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, some of the particular materialistic and consumption-based mindsets that we've really become, programmed into. It feels like it happened around the same time as that almost severing of, practices like astrology from the mainstream and from the overall accept, because you're right, it's very much an accepted valid practice through a lot of history and guided a lot of different historical figures and time periods.
Oh
And
yeah.
it feels like some of the roots of our own disconnection maybe can be traced back from a disregard to that spiritual aspect and to because it feels like it's an understanding of who we are at the foundational root of astrology, you
Oh
know.
yeah. I think it is. And I think that also, when any major shift like this happens, and I would say major shift in terms of the regard of astrology as a credible practice, that's what I'm focusing on in this moment. I think, you have to look at why people are motivated to behave in certain ways, right? Like, what is it these people have to gain by, particular motivations for their actions? One of my favorite quotes about astrology is actually from the banker J.P. Morgan. He said, "Millionaires don't have astrologers, but billionaires do."
Hmm.
And I love that quote because he was one of the most ruthless financiers of the last century. And he definitely relied on astrology to make his business transactions. And he was making them at scale. So if somebody who was that credible and that profitable was able to use astrology for his own personal benefit, then why is it then discredited in other parts of the media? You have to wonder who is benefiting.
Mhm. Right, exactly. And that's a whole world of theory and speculation, and like, you could get to come up with I guess a theory on that, but to me it does feel like what we were talking about earlier with it sort of making a comeback. The whole paradigm in itself it's bound for sort of a natural shift and a natural evolution to where maybe we are coming back more to ourselves and coming back to more of these foundational practices, because I think this is a time where individuals can I think a lot of people are seeking guidance outside of the traditional formats because there is a lot of people feeling lost and disconnected. They have everything inside the paradigm that's supposed to give us happiness, right? Maybe they got the job, they got the family, they got the house and the car, and they go to church on Sunday and they got their weekends off and they take a vacation every year, right? But there's still so many people, maybe they even have millions of dollars. There's people who are still so drastically unfulfilled and feeling purposeless, kind of living and feeling as if it's, a cog in a machine, right? And I've had points in my life where it's like, yeah, I don't want any of those things because I don't want to be a cog in a machine. I don't want to feel like I'm confined within a sort of bubble, right? So, to me, it feels like we're entering a new time in a sense, but it still, to me at least, remains to be seen how that's going to be defined and what that actually looks like. I mean, do you have any insight on what you think? It's tough to predict how I guess the structures and the systems support this type of change, but do you think this means there is going to be sort of drastic changes on a collective level and a sort of more drastic shifts on how we even approach our day-to-day lives with the astrology changing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think 2025 is and 2026 are priming themselves to be years of dramatic change that we might only be able to parallel to or liken to the drastic changes of 2020. Not that they will be as painful to live through. That's not what I mean. But what I mean is that was a year that everyone can collectively look back on in recent memory where we were like, everything changed overnight.
Hmm.
Um, I don't think it's going to be quite as like, boom, this one day everything changed kind of a thing. Because what happened in 2020 was actually a follow-on from what happened in December 2019 with the triple grand conjunction of Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter and Capricorn. That then precipitated the lockdowns in March. Um, but what I do think is going to happen is that we're going to have three outer planets all changing sign in the next 18 months or so. Between Pluto, who is moving into Aquarius, like I mentioned earlier, he'll be there for 20 years. We have Uranus moving from the end of Taurus into Gemini, which is potentially bad news, at least for America. And historically, every time Uranus has gone into Gemini, America has been at war.
Okay.
Um, and so I'm a little concerned that there will be another war. And then also another underlying factor of that same concern is we have Neptune moving from its home sign of Pisces into Aries, which also suggests conflict breaking out. And so while I do think there will be some sort of aggravation or conflict that becomes very obvious and that is likely to embroil America, I do think that we also have sort of a new frontier between a heightened sense of spirituality, but Saturn is also in Pisces right now too, and until Saturn moves out of Pisces and into Aries, I'm a little concerned about the prospects of conflict and war concerning the United States
Hmm.
unfolding on the world scale over the next couple of years. But I don't think it's going to be the end of the world.
Right.
Um, I think that sometimes conflict can be a necessary vehicle for growth, and present us with a lot of opportunities for advancement and change. But you know, it depends on what that conflict looks like and who it involves. Um,
Hmm.
so those are the fuzzy places in the sort of script, if you will.
Hmm.
Who are the characters that are being cast in this conflict, this conflicting roles? But I do think we'll find out. The
Right.
universe has a way of surprising us.
Definitely. Well, and it's very interesting because I've sat with a lot of, I'm very much a anti-war person in a lot of ways, and it's like I try and sit with like what is the necessary role of conflict in man itself, right? And it's like I think we all have internal conflicts we go through all the time, right? And the macro tends to be a reflection of the individual state of awareness and the micro, right? So it's like, can we go through the necessary periods of conflict without waging global war? Like, does conflict have to look like war, right? And I don't necessarily have answers to that, right? Are these periods of large scale conflict necessary for our growth as humans, as a species? And you could make the argument that yes. I mean, you don't want to just obviously go and bomb schools and children and leave people in utter ruins and despair. But I think looking at it from an astrological perspective, you can kind of be like, okay, I understand. I at least understand why this is happening. Can we get to the roots of maybe why we need conflict and then turn that conflict into more self accountability and self reckoning and things of that nature? I just wrote a poetry collection that I put out, and I noticed the overall theme in it. It tends to take on a theme. It was that idea of inner conflict and self-reckoning and self-awareness and kind of going through that battle within yourself. And it feels very applicable to the day and age because I think a lot of people are going through that process, but then we see it manifest into global chaos and global conflicts. And we're already seeing some of the roots being planted to where conflict can start to play out, whether it's in the Middle East or Russia or China, right? There's all these different potential scenarios that might blow up on us. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, conflict could take place in any theater, really, but I think you had an interesting point to bring up, like what is the value or the meaning of conflict within man, but and relating that to self-reckoning and self-reflection and personal growth, I think a world where we are each sort of a witness to our own behaviors and actions and really confronted with the possibility that we have to be happy with, or at least content with, our actions on a daily basis is sort of key. And I
Mm,
don't think that sometimes I think we are just really far removed from the implications of our day-to-day actions.
mm,
Um, like we get so caught up in the need to get a job and provide for our families that we are willing to make decisions that maybe if we had more options, we wouldn't make because we just have to do what we have to do.
mhm,
And there's no shame that comes from that, I think. But if we have a more, I don't want to say abundant mindset, but a mindset of empathy and also integrity that comes from standing in a place of peace from whatever decisions you make about your own life, from the way you treat other people, whether they be strangers or family members, or the way you speak to yourself, like that all has ripple effects. That all, I mean, like your own self-worth and self-love really can define the kinds of relationships you have, the kinds of jobs you get. So it kind of starts inside yourself.
mhm,
Um, and that's something that I think a lot of people um, place an emphasis on external value and self-worth as perceived through the eyes of other people. But if you're able to find that self-worth inside yourself alone in the woods, without a mirror, just like through your own actions, you're in a pretty strong place. You're in a
mhm,
powerful place of um, coming from a place of self-love and acceptance and a real place of peace with yourself. And if you have that, that's something that can be very difficult to take away from you.
right, definitely. And I think that's the ultimate definition of, being free, really, in the purest sense, being sovereign, being able to uh, step into yourself fully. I think that's ultimately, the end goal of any sort of meditation practice or spirituality in general. Like, why are we doing these things? It's to be able to walk into the world with that empowered mindset and live these values through our actions. And I think what the only thing that's difficult is we don't always see the immediate payoff or gratification we're so used to getting from other things, right? If we go out and we spread kindness, we're not necessarily going to see the seeds of that kindness uh, fruit, harvest on that in that very moment, right? I mean, karma can work quick, but it's not always that quick. So we can it can be very easy to get discouraged or fall off the path because we're not always necessarily besides an internal gratification, we're not always necessarily seeing that ripple effect take place in the day to day. I mean, it happens, but I think if it were more fast moving, people would get that immediate like dopamine hit of it and be like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna keep doing this, right? Um, but it doesn't
Yeah.
always work like that.
No, I think you really have to get to a place where you're just doing it for your own personal enjoyment.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's again, it goes back to that external source of validation versus that internal source of I'm doing X, Y, or Z because I feel like this is the right thing for me to do. Um, regardless of what other people around me might want, or if I'm being well received, or if I'm getting some sort of monetary gain from it, you have to do it because it feels like the right thing for you to do.
Hmm. Definitely. And another thing I wanted to ask about, in particular with like astrology or even tarot, for example, one of the biggest roadblocks I've found with introducing tarot, for example, to somebody And, I have a few close friends who I'll talk about tarot with and to practice with, but their main concern is that it's rooted in like some sort of like devil worshiping or or they're afraid of the occult aspects of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but I personally think it can go hand in hand with any religious practice, whether it's Christianity or whatever, wherever somebody's coming from. I mean, where do you see sort of astrology and other forms of divination coinciding with maybe more traditional religious approaches that can tend to be a bit more dogmatic?
Well, I think that all the things that you mentioned, whether it's tarot or astrology, they're just tools, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they are tools to help you tap into the subtle themes of your life. Um, and I would say it's the determination, whether or not something is determinate of the future. That's where, you know, there becomes this sort of gray area where religious issues can get involved. But I'm a big believer in free will.
Mhm.
So really, I mean, you have free will to do whatever you want in your life. These tools, astrology or tarot or reading tea leaves or whatever, um, those are either pieces of paper that are printed, or they're leaves in a cup, or astrology is the positions of planetary bodies in the sky. These are all just things that exist.
Mhm.
It's the importance and the relevance that we as humans put on them that define whether or not something has energy. And so if you're going at it with a sense of, well, this is evil, then you're the one who's giving it that power to,
Mhm.
to to be used for evil. But if you're going to it and using these tools as a tool for personal growth and tapping into a higher sense of consciousness, then how is that evil? There's just no, like, it's just no way for it to be. So it really does have to do with intention and tuning your inner compass into what it is you want to generate in this existence. Do you want to be a source of inspiration and growth and kindness for your community, or do you want to spread the fear of fear itself?
Right. Definitely. And I think fear is it's the big roadblock, right? I mean, if whenever we don't understand something, there's going to be a natural element of fear that we put to it. But I think it's about the willingness to dive into the mystery itself. Because I mean, this is, whether it's astrology or tarot, the more I've been studying tarot for 7 years, and there's still more that I keep uncovering about it the deeper I go. It seems to be an infinite well of personal growth and knowledge because I keep heading further into it, right? There really is no end, which I think is kind of the beauty of it in a sense, because it's something you can continually rely upon for a source of inspiration and a source for growth. But you do kind of have to get past that initial fear roadblock, and there's still times now where I'll catch myself like, I don't really want to read my tarot because I know it's going to tell me what I don't want to hear, and I don't
Yeah,
want.
but that's not the tarot's fault, though, is it? That's
No.
your actual lack of unwillingness to admit whatever it is that's going on.
Exactly. It comes back to self accountability and the willingness to sit with myself. But I've done
Yeah.
it enough times now to where it's like, okay, I trust myself to know and to face myself and be with it, even if I don't necessarily want to, or I'm hesitant or reluctant. And if anything, when I find I'm more reluctant to lean on my spiritual practices, that's probably when I need them the most.
Oh, yeah, probably. Yeah, I'm not surprised that you feel that way, but it does make sense though. Um,
Mhm.
I think uh yeah, I mean, you have to practice it in order for it to be there for you when you need it though.
Mhm.
Um, and I think one of most people who I have met and worked with who are let's just say they're skeptical and they're very readily eager to malign these practices, whether it's tarot, astrology, what have you, they tend to have a difficulty sitting with themselves on
Mhm.
some level. Not all of them, but most of them have some sort of preoccupation that they would rather attend to, whether it's work or a relationship or going to the gym or, a hobby. All that stuff comes before really checking in with yourself and knowing yourself.
Hmm.
Um, and I think, all those other things are great, but unless you can really show up for yourself, on a basic level of your own self-accountability, um, then all that other stuff kind of doesn't have as much meaning as it could. Um, so it's it's something that I hope and I'm excited to see being more readily accepted and more of a focus. Wellness in general is becoming much more accepted and promoted in mainstream culture. And I think and I hope that it's a positive shift and not just lip service.
Hmm.
Because I think it is something that's genuinely beneficial. It makes all those other things I just mentioned, whether it is work or relationships or gym, or hobbies or whatever, it makes it all much richer and more profound when you have a deep understanding and positive relationship with yourself. And that's all these are tools for, really.
Right.
And so if you are reluctant to explore them, I think you have a bigger question to ask yourself of whether or not you are reluctant to explore yourself.
Definitely. And that really was highlighted to me. Last year I did one of the 10-day silent Vipassana meditation retreats, where you go in and you're just meditating basically for 10 days straight. There's no speaking, there's no connection to the outside world. Like you're with yourself 10 days in a row. That's it. And the number one thing people told me after the fact when I got back and when I would bring it up or they'd ask about it, they'd say the reason they'd say they couldn't do it. Oh, I couldn't sit with myself that long. Oh, I couldn't sit for 10 days straight. That was always that was the only thing people said why they wouldn't do it. And so, and if that's the mindset they have, I genuinely believe them. They probably couldn't do it. I
Yeah,
mean, I, I
yeah,
had I had doubts in a sense of like, oh, do I really want to do that? But I knew I could do it. I knew I was willing to sit with myself, and it wasn't an easy experience necessarily, but it was very fulfilling. And then, I would do it again, as crazy as that sounds. But that was really highlighted to me of the fear of people having just of themselves, and if anything, I find that like I don't want to say disheartening or sad necessarily, but it highlights, I think, the conundrum that we face as a society, in that we don't know ourselves and we're afraid to get to know ourselves. And something like astrology or tarot that really is just there to teach us about ourselves. No wonder it's demonized or shunned, or people aren't always looking to use it because, well, do they want to know about themselves? And the realistic answer is not really. It's like I heard a great quote about this that the pain of staying, in order to change, the pain of staying the same needs to be greater than the actual pain of change itself in order to even be willing to change. And I think that really rings true in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I would agree. As somebody who has a lot of fixed energy in my chart, like finding a routine and a rhythm is all too easy.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think that, yeah, change really does have to be um preferable
Yeah.
in order for if staying the same is really that bad. Like change has to be preferable. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, and so it was something that I definitely relate to as well. And another area I wanted to ask about, I'm sure one of the big like astrological topics I find right now is the coming of the age of Aquarius. Is that something I'm sure you're studied and familiar with. Is it as big of a shift as people are? Because I can't say I necessarily know all about the shifts of what it's supposed to bring and how the world's supposed to change, but it seems we're coming into the people are referring it to as the age of Aquarius. Like,
Yeah.
could you kind of define what that is at the very least? And do you see it being as large scale of changes that people are kind of alluding it to be? Like, what is your sort of take on that? Because there seems to be a fascination with it too. I see a lot of astrological circles and references to it, and there's music about it, and so it seems to be a big topic at the very least.
Yeah, well, so from a planetary shift perspective, um as I mentioned earlier, Pluto is moving into Aquarius where he'll
Mhm.
stay well, it's not stay, he'll be traveling through the sign for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
So that's a big shift for our collective lifetime. And it's going to be tangible. There will be a real shift from the energy of Capricorn, where he's been since 2008, into the energetic sort of properties of Aquarian energy. And that's interesting. But also what's interesting is where the conjunctions between some of these outer planets are occurring. Um, Jupiter and Saturn have been conjunct in Earth signs, I want to say, for the last 200 and some odd years. I forget the exact date, but it coincided around the time of the Industrial Revolution. Um, and so since then, we have been in a very much like capitalistic, market-driven, commodity-driven economy. Um, Now, we have shifted from these conjunctions happening in Capricorn, which is the most advanced Earth sign, into air signs. So the next several hundred years of conjunctions between Jupiter and Saturn will be happening in air signs. And so those two planets really do kind of set the tone for it's a sort of like a when you're stringing a guitar, you're tuning things up, and you're trying to get in the harmony and the rhythm. Those two planets kind of set the tone for all the other planets to, like Pluto and the outer planets move very slowly, but Saturn and Jupiter together, Jupiter moves around the zodiac every 12 years, Saturn takes 30 years. So when they meet up, it's very special, and it does sort of set the energetic mood, if you will, for quite some time around it. But from now on, for the rest of our lifetimes, I believe, those two planets will be meeting up in air signs, which are much more idea oriented
Mm.
and much less physical item commodification energies of the earth signs. So I think that the energy will become lighter as a result of that. And it will be more about this quick moving intellectual stimulation that inspires change from a place of thoughts and ideals versus tangible bottom lines.
Mm.
Not that that's completely going out the window, but it's a springboard to this next level of society. And I think that's what people refer to as the Age of Aquarius. Um, it's a combination of those two things. But Aquarius energy isn't exactly a total walk in the park.
Mm.
Aquarius is ruled by the planet Uranus, which is famously unpredictable. Um, Uranus really is sort of binary in its energy. It's on or it's off. It's the planet of sudden change, of rebellion, but also of sudden genius and revelations. So, and also revolutions. So it's not easy. It's just going to be different.
Mm, definitely. It's almost like setting new foundations and setting new ideas into place. And you know what's interesting is I think the technology of our time, this is just something I just thought of as you were speaking about this. It seems like the technology of our time, we look at like smartphones and computers, it's very like mind oriented, right? It's very stimulating for the mind. And it almost in a way, when you get lost in the doom scrolling on your cell phone, like you're in your mind, you exit your body. Like it's very much like we're moving into an age of mind more so than anything else, where, you know, 30 years ago, we didn't have this type of technology to really capture the mind and to really stimulate in that way. And we are much more grounded in the physical body in a lot of ways, out in the
Oh, yeah.
community and more present at the very least. So to me, it seems like you can already kind of start to see how that shift towards mind is beginning to take place. we're starting to see the increase in things like artificial intelligence and technology. And so, to me, it's, I think there's a level of mindfulness we need to have about that. And, how far into that do we lean into and do we want to play into? And, you don't want to necessarily fully lose touch with the physical body, but, we kind of have to lean into, okay, if this is an age of mind, how do I navigate that? How do I move forward in that? And
Yeah. I think so. I think that's a really interesting question. But one thing really love to point out is Chat GPT and was debuted the first time that Pluto moved into Aquarius on the same day.
oh wow.
Yeah.
That's actually there. I live by the idea that there's no such thing as coincidences. Coincidence coincide us when you break down the word. So it's a synchronization. I think that in itself tells you what
Yeah.
the coming of that age represents then, the
Yeah, I
debuts the
think
same day.
it's exemplary of it. And I think that rep is representative of an idea of the kinds of abilities and things that we'll see developing over the next 20 years. It really will be leaps and bounds of innovation and um, development that we are going to witness, and it's going to be very quick, I think. Um, but the thing that we will have to struggle with and really will have to put a lot of mental effort into is catching up with the ethics of it all. Because Aquarian energy is also famously humanitarian minded. It really does want to serve the good of the masses of the people. And that's going to have to be considered when we think about how we want to use this technology as a society.
Mm.
And we'll watch it unfold. I mean, I really can't predict what humanity is going to do on a global scale like that at large, but I think we will witness it collectively together.
Right, definitely. And I think we'll have the path of morality and ethics and people really putting conscious intent and usage into these technologies. And certainly there's always the shadow side of that where people try and manipulate and take advantage and control. And it's just sort of about coming back to our own individual awareness. How do I want to engage in this? Right. And you can kind of create your own story in a way from there. There's always the option to do good as well as there's always the option to do evil. And I think that's sort of just the nature of man in a sense, those dueling forces within us. We have the capability of whatever we choose, and um, so I don't think there's going to be one that necessarily overtakes the other because they need each other to coexist. That's just how it works. So I'm very much not because it's very easy to look at AI and, for example, and go down the rabbit hole of it's going to overtake man and we're doomed and this is the end of humanity and we're going to be enslaved to artificial intelligence. I've heard all those things and I understand the concern behind it. But I choose not to ride that boat of eternal doom from these technologies in this age because I think there's enough conscious intent behind enough people's actions to where that's not going to be a path that dominates per se.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I think you could even go so far as to say that we're already sort of unwittingly sort of slaves to the machine, whether it's e-commerce or whatever.
Hmm.
I mean, the amount of marketing and cookies and data they have on each one of us as individuals because of our cell phones and our browsing history is pretty astonishing. So,
Hmm.
and that exists already.
Right.
That's not anything that's particularly groundbreaking news to anybody. Um, but I do think with the development of some of this technology, there will be a sort of democratization of how we use it. So I'm really excited to see how people get creative and make positive change in the world. I saw an article earlier today that said there was this company out of California that's making genetically modified um rhinoceros horns that are
Oh.
grown in petri dishes to help stop poaching. So they like this company's plan is to flood the Chinese market with rhino horns and market them as 100% pure to stave off um, the desire for poachers to go kill the animals in the wild. Now, who can tell if that's going to have some sort of weird backlash that we can't foresee? Um, but I think that's a really, creative and largely positive use of that kind of engineering.
Right, definitely. Instead of exploiting the environment and exploiting the rhinoceros, let's create, if we have the technology, let's create what is in demand, right? And then supply it. I think
Yeah.
that's a beautiful use of technology. I actually really like that. I'm gonna have to look into that. And I think there's technology like that that's going to be developing all over. They might do the same thing with something like elephant tusks or, you name it, whatever it is that's in demand. Maybe we don't need to be exploitive of the natural habitat to the large scale that the age of industrialization was, because we're starting to see the consequence of that and the ramifications of that. And it seems to be there's such a growing awareness that a lot of the practices and ways we were living is inherently flawed in those regards, that maybe this is an age of innovation where we co-create with the environment and we co-create with nature to help. If that demand maybe doesn't necessarily go away, but can we provide it ourselves, right? Can we work in our own creative force to, kind of support. And, I guess you can make the argument, well, the whole system in itself is corrupt. They don't need that kind of demand. Well, maybe, but that's not what the reality is at the moment, right? So
Yeah.
we don't need to collapse the whole system in that way. Let's find a solution that's
Yeah.
conscious and humane, you know?
I thought it was you know, sort of genius psychological marketing. I mean, they're giving people what they want. They're not trying to change people's behavior. They're just trying to change the ramifications from sourcing that behavior and
Mhm.
catering to it. Because people are stubborn and change is difficult for people by and large. So I think it's sort of I don't know a whole lot about this company, but I thought it was an elegant aim for an elegant solution to a problem
Mhm.
uh, that can maybe really make a difference.
Right, definitely. Well, I agree with you. I'm excited to see the type of technologies that come about. And there's one other topic I wanted to bring up with you. I see you do a lot of work with like past lives, for example, and an exam like that's an area you've at least researched. How does that in the topic of death is one that I've sat with many, many times, written about and explored. And I think a lot of our fears, just in general of life, they stem from a fear of death and this idea that we have this one finite lifetime, and this is who we are. We're our physical bodies. We kind of disregard the aspect of the soul, right? And maybe the idea of a larger soul's journey. But how does, like, you would say, the bigger picture in terms of the soul and, maybe going through past lives play into this larger journey and into this lifetime, and something that we can actually make practical for us, and something we can learn from, to kind of put it all into greater perspective, even.
Yeah, well, I think it kind of goes back to a fear of some sort. I mean, like you said, most of our fears sort of center around this being our only life. Well, that's certainly true. This is the only life we know we have for now.
Hmm.
Um, However, um, I have had my own personal experiences. I have memories of past lives on other planets, which might scare people or be controversial in some way. Do I think I'm living those lives currently in this body? No. I think that or believe that my life source, my energy, the consciousness that I wake up with on some level was also the consciousness that lived those lives.
Hmm.
Um, Um, but I think that when I look at someone's astrology chart, for example, we can look at certain aspects of the chart, the way it's laid out, or the certain planetary positions or functions of the chart can give us clues to what some of the baggages that we may have come into this life with, that we are being asked by the universe to cope with, to grow from, and to overcome. And really help us enrich who we are and create a bigger like a deeper sense of empathy for our fellow humans through the actions of that. So I certainly think that we can look at elements of the chart to sort of suss out what some of those issues might be. And if we do larger chart analyses between family members or significant others, for example, oftentimes you'll find patterns where particular planets are in reciprocity to each other, or they are, there's a theme there that emerges, and you can sort of start to tease these threads of connection out that might have been sort of laid out, you know, before we came into these bodies to live these lives. And there's some sort of karmic connection, if you will, or some sort of lesson that we need to learn from that particular set of circumstances or relationships.
Definitely. And I'm very much of the belief in terms of we come into we choose this lifetime for the specific lessons and ideas and things that we're supposed to learn in a sense, right? It's no accident that our chart is laid out in the way that it is with the points of growth that we need. And if all of our family members have this one specific alignment, well, maybe we can root some of the ancestral trauma into some of what's going on here. What is sort of the storytelling, right? And I think it's definitely a way to have a greater understanding and appreciation for uh, generating meaning in this lifetime, right? And it's like, this life, maybe it's part of a bigger journey. Certainly this is where I am and who I am now, but maybe that's not all who I am. Clearly, if there is karmic effects, and I'm in the same boat where I've had past life memories and done past life regressions and um, different experiences in different bodies and different forms and different like wavelengths, like where it's like, whoa, I'm me, and that person, I know who that person is. They're not. That's not who it is now, but I recognize that person. I recognize it, and it's so you can start to see the almost infinite experiences that this consciousness has had, because consciousness in itself is infinite in its nature. So, and if we are consciousness, then that would make us infinite in its nature too, right? So it's, you start putting those different pieces together and you can start, we're never going to necessarily, I think, be able to give that immediate certainty to that the rational mind craves when we look at subjects like this, but it can start to really sort of feel the meaning within ourselves and know the truth in these past experiences and know the truth in what the charts are telling us and what maybe a past life memory is telling us, because I think truth in itself doesn't always have to be material or rationally measured all the time for it to still be truth. There's different levels of truth in that way, right? So we don't always need that concrete material like, yes, I have a past life and I can prove it through my scientific data sheet. I mean, that might be nice, but it's not always going to work like that, right? I think we need to let go of the need for that all the time. Um,
Yeah, well, I mean, something is true in your heart and in your mind when it's true. I mean, maybe not every single time, but there is a sense of truth that comes through, just like, the sun will rise tomorrow and the sky will be blue, you
mhm,
know, um, and nobody has to convince you of it, but it's true.
mhm,
Um, and so that's the sort of profound sense of knowing that you get from being able to do this work and examine your experiences, maybe that happen in a different lifetime in conjunction with, the events of this current timeline and this life and draw those parallels, you get that kind of sense of awakening that says, okay, well, maybe there's more going on here than meets the eye, and let me take a step back. And maybe when you do that, you can begin to understand the bigger, longer term picture and be more empathetic and more forgiving of other people and other situations. And I think that has a ripple effect of creating a sympathetic, empathetic, abundant life for all of us. Really, it creates an environment of forgiving and kindness, and it is just less fear-based, and or less based in anger,
Mm.
because there's a greater sense of understanding that comes with it.
Right. And compassion and empathy, which, I think in itself, sh- I try and make the root of my interactions based on empathy and compassion and being mindful of that everybody has their own different perspectives and ideas. And, I think we should harmonize around the common interconnections and the common truths of that, right? And there's a beauty in that we can find,
Yeah.
and sort of hello dog, hello puppy in the background.
This is Nicole. She's excited to join.
Wonderful, wonderful. Always welcome animal friends to the podcast. That is a bit sometimes my cat jumps into the picture, but she's off doing something else. But and sort of as a wrap up topic, I know just astrology and these practices, they could be like it can feel like a mammoth to look at and see. Like there's almost like this is so huge. Where do I even like start? Where do I even begin? What do you recommend? Like somebody who's listening to this and feels the truth in it, sees that okay, there's more to this that I haven't really explored and uncovered. Where do you actually recommend people begin? I mean, because there's thousands of astrology books. There's countless places you could go to and you maybe get your chart read or whatever it is, right? Where do you recommend people actually begin to sort of dive into this as an entryway for someone who might be
Uh,
interested?
I'm gonna be shameless right now and say, come to me. Um,
Yes, I love that.
I do a podcast that's free for anybody to listen to. It's on Spotify or iTunes. It's called Blood Moon Milk Astrology. It comes out every new or full moon. I also write a daily newsletter that talks about the day's most important astrological events in a way that helps you to self-educate so that you learn your own chart points. And the best place to start is with a session with an astrologer. And I'm going to say, come see me, because I'm your guest and I get to do that right now.
Hmm.
And you can book a session, and I'll walk you through your natal chart as well as your transits that are in effect, what the themes of those transits are. And then I'll also help you like define what some of your goals are and work with you long term, to help meet those goals and help to tease out these threads that are connective tissue of your transits and your natal chart. And how that all sort of paints a picture and goes into what your life looks like now to help improve it on an incremental level that is really useful and down to earth. And it's really a system you can use for the rest of your life.
Mm, beautiful. I love it. I love the shamelessness because I'm a big believer in shamelessly like promote and express what the work that you do and the creativity because I think that's the gifts that we bring to the world, right? And that's exactly I think what a lot of people do need. It's easy to go on and I don't know, let me go on CoStar and
Yeah,
type in my info, which is you can get the astrology chart, but
yeah.
there's like surface level types of ways of looking at it. But I think going, like say going to yourself and actually interacting with your work and really taking a deep dive, I think it is how you start to apply a lot of these concepts because it is, especially when something is new, it's tough to see those interconnections of how it applies and why it applies and what certain aspects of it mean and what you know, well, it, it's very difficult to do that process. I did that for myself I tried to do that with myself for tarot, for example, and it's taken me years and years and years to actually create my own system and see some of the different levels of interconnections where if right off the bat I had went to somebody for it, there's a very good chance that I would have figured out what I figured out in 3 years within 3 months, you know?
Quite possibly. But also, I mean, like you can, like you said, you can go to websites and get your chart, and then you get this sort of nice pre-written thing
Mhm.
that is somewhat relevant to you. But it's sort of like going to AI and being like, okay, tell me X, Y, and Z. You're not really getting to have a conversation with somebody who's had a lot of experience looking up these things. And
Mhm.
so that's really the value of going to an astrologer, is being able to have that conversation, that is not just information pre-written in a book somewhere. They're going to spend their time with you going over key themes that show up and that are obvious, things for you to look out for, maybe periods of challenge or areas of opportunity coming up, and help you make the most of those opportunities. And really, that's why my clients come to me, is because they value their time. And I think that our time is our collective most important asset for each one of
Mhm.
us. There is money to be made in the world. Like you can go out and make some tomorrow, but no one can manufacture time.
Mhm.
Um, and so knowing how to best use your time can be really valuable.
Definitely. And I 100% resonate with that. And I think it's, investing in, you know, going to, let's say you for an astrolog as an astrologist, that's like a self-investment in a lot of
Oh yeah.
ways, and I think people, instead of just saying, sometimes spiritual counseling or anything along these lines, sometimes I think it gets lumped into more of the idea of this is a luxury if I'm able to do it. And in some sense, sure. But in a lot of ways, I think it can be just as valuable as, let's say, a gym membership or,
Oh yeah.
therapy or whatever. And all of these different things have their different places. But I think once we start seeing, doing things like this regularly, start seeing the benefits of it, you start to see, oh, this isn't just something that I want to pay for when it's a luxury. It's something I can actually take a lot of benefit from, and I'm seeing the immediate payoff, right? And so I think that mindset shift on how it's categorized, I think is a big thing too. And what value are we placing into it? You'll get what you, I think, put in ultimately at the end of the day, right? If somebody is just looking for maybe a one-off session, there's value in it, but it's like, can I use this tool for the rest of my life to help
Oh
roadmap
yeah.
my life? Well, if you go in with
Absolutely.
that intention, you'll probably get that out of it, which I think is a beautiful thing with practices like astrology and tarot, and you know that's
Absolutely. And I think so. I like to see clients quarterly because that gives the planets time to move and to shift. And a lot of times people come to me because something is wrong. Like
mm,
they're having some sort of period of difficulty. And I'm happy to see them through that. But the real growth comes from the aha moment of being able to circle a date on the calendar and say the energies will shift for you on this day. And then you get to come back the next quarter and say, you were right. Well, let's do some more work. And these are the things I'm working on. When's the best time to launch this project? Or when should I book a vacation? Or like these kinds of things might seem sort of like mundane choices, but if you make them intelligently, you can save yourself a ton of money, a ton of frustration, and also just go through feeling a little bit more confident on a day-to-day basis.
definitely. Well, it just reminds me of that. I think it was the JP Morgan quote that you chose, because I'm sure that's exactly what he was doing in order to create the life that he did for himself and his investments and all of this. It's like, all right, I'm going to do it on this date. I'm going to do this on this date. And if you can actually make your actions align with what the planets are aligned with, then it's like that's the optimal ideal way to go about it. And I can't think of anyone who doesn't want that, backing in a sense, or doesn't want to make, everybody wants to make decisions at the right time. And I think sometimes the uncertainty is what kills us, or the not knowing is what kills us. And it's
Oh
like,
yeah.
if anything, this kind of gives a map of certainty, which is what people are looking for. So, tremendous value in that. So Aurora, where could, let's say they're interested, where could people go to, let's they want to book with you, or where they could go to find all of your work? Where should they go to do that?
Yeah, so I'm easily found. My website is bloodmoonmilk.com. That's the name of the podcast is Blood Moon Milk. And the story behind that name is the blood moons used to be feared in ancient times. They happened around the times of the eclipses, and it would send people into a panic. But I like to think of Blood Moon Milk as sort of the tonic to that panic, as a way to sort of understand the energetic tides of astrological phases and give you something to help digest it all and to make sense of it all.
Hmm. I love that. I love that. I'll have the in the episode show notes the link to your show and the link to your website so people can go on and just book right down there. Everybody knows how to use technology and scroll, so
You can book with me there. You can sign up for the Daily Dose, which is my email newsletter. That's very affordable. I think of it like buying a cup of coffee for me once a month to get the emails in your inbox every day, Monday through Friday. Friday is the weekend edition. A lot of people really come to look forward to it and rely on that. And that's just a simple way to learn and self-educate yourself about the planets and get to know your astrology chart because I put the planets and their positions in there every day. So you get to slowly, bit by bit, gain insight and build a habit, build a functional practice.
I love that. I love that. I'll have the links for all of that below. And Aurora, I really appreciate you coming on. This is very informative for me, and started interconnecting some different points. And I will definitely have to plan to chat again as the planets continue to shift and align. This is the beautiful thing about astrology in this topic. It's that it's going to continually be ongoing. So there's never going to be a shortage of things to actually chat about and explore because as the planets change, so do we, and so does society, and so does the world. So, we have an infinite well to draw from in terms of future conversations. So we'll definitely have to plan on that sometime in the future.
Absolutely. The planets never take a day off.
No, definitely not. And in a sense, neither do we. I mean, we do, but we don't. So, well,
Yeah, yeah.
but awesome. Thank you so much, Roy. I really had fun in this conversation, and I appreciate you coming on, and I know the listeners will get a lot from this. So, I really appreciate all that you're doing and being able to share it with us.
Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure.
Oh, absolutely. And thanks everybody for tuning on in. And we shall see you all on the next episode. Take care. Special thank you to Aurora for coming on the Fifth Dimension. Highly recommend you guys check out her podcast and also sign up for her daily letter. I mean, it's really important to know what the astrology is telling us, and I think that's a great way to support her work and then stay up to date with everything that you might need in terms of your own astrology placements and really learning about yourself and making the correct decisions uh, with a bit of decisiveness in knowing that the universe is supporting you. So, hope you guys enjoyed this one as much as I did. If you're a fan of the show, be sure to subscribe, whatever platform you are on. Be sure to purchase a copy of my new poetry book, Final Judgment, and it is out now. It's available on Amazon. The link to shows in the episode show notes below. It's a great way to support the show, get some awesome poems, and really learn about yourself in the process. Each poem can really serve as a meditation. So I hope you guys enjoy it. I really enjoyed putting that collection together. And I think that's it. That's all we got. No, McDermott.substack.com. McDermott.substack.com. Go subscribe on Substack. Your home for all of the podcast, poems, news articles, whatever it may be that I feel like sharing. It's up on the Substack. So be sure to check that out. Hope you guys subscribe because there's more great interviews coming your way in the very near future with a lot of new guests. And I'll see you all next time. So long.